Welcome to the WTL What the Law podcast. I'm your host Callum Stacey, and today you're listening to the latest in our series inspired by a conversation with a group of law students involved in pro bono law clinics. These students were incredibly proactive, but from our conversation it became apparent that they had not had the opportunity to be exposed to a wide variety of career paths available to law graduates. As a result, we developed this series to shine a light on some of the new generation of leaders in the legal industry and the diversity of their journeys to date. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Emma Levin. Amongst her many accolades, Emma has been awarded the Rising Star at the Women and Diversity in Law Awards, become an O-lister in 2024, and won the In-House Lawyer of the Year. Emma is currently the sole legal counsel at OneBright, the personalised mental health care company building a brighter way to provide life-changing support for people around the world. Prior to this, Emma was the General Counsel of MENA, an EV charging payment solution provider, leading them through a process whereby they ultimately were acquired by Allstar. These roles were built upon a mixture of both private practice experience with Linklaters and in-house experiences with Barclays Investment Bank, Condé Nast and Unihomes. So Emma, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, that was quite an intro.
Well, I have to admit, when I was doing some of the research for this ahead of time, I have to admit I had come across you in your time at MENA, and I went through things and I was like, crikey. I've been very slow here. This
I've
is
done
ridiculous.
a lot in quite a short space of time. As I mentioned to you before we started, I turned 30 last month, so I've had quite a varied career in the legal sector already. But yeah, it's all been good. It's exciting.
Excellent. Well, whilst we've done the kind of whistle stop of your career to date, I think one of the really important things to understand how we are where we are is to look all the way back to where we started from. And I was hoping that you could maybe just give a little summary discussion about what the foundations were for you. You know, where did you grow up? Where did you go to school? Etc.
So probably not what you'd expect from your classic Linklaters lawyer. Grew up in a place called Rotherham in South Yorkshire. My mum worked at the local job centre and my dad worked in construction. I didn't know anyone that was a lawyer. That was something reserved for, TV shows or Legally Blonde. And the reason I decided to do a law degree is that there was a guy in my class who was called George. If he's listening, he's now at Freeths. And he said one day, I'm going to do a law degree. And I thought that sounded really cool. I was like, wow, that sounds really impressive. I'm going to do a law degree as well. So I dragged my parents to a law lecture at one of the Oxbridge colleges, I think, and I had absolutely no idea what was happening in that law lecture, and I thought, well, that's a challenge, we'll do that one. There was no other logic than that.
And when you were growing up, did you have access to lawyers, or did you ever come across lawyers, or was it just something that was, I guess, nowadays, I saw it on Suits, but other than that, that's the only exposure I have.
Honestly, the only one I can think of is like Legally Blonde and like BBC dramas. I definitely didn't know anyone that was a lawyer. I think I did like 2 days of work experience at a personal injury firm. There was like a high street one in Doncaster, which I thought would look good for my Durham application. But other than that, literally nothing. I had no idea what a law degree would entail, whether I wanted to be a lawyer. That's the other thing to say. I applied to do law and was like, oh, I think I'll be a teacher. It was just the most random thing. But I didn't like English enough to do a degree on it, I didn't think. And I didn't like history enough to do a degree on that. So it was like, oh, well, law, people say that doing history and English is good for law, I'll do that one.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And when you were at school, were you always more on the kind of, how do I put this? Not the argumentative side, but on the waffly side, subjects like English and history, as opposed to physics or chemistry or subjects that have one right answer?
Yeah, good question. I was always very studious. Like, I loved school and I was very competitive. You know, like some people are competitive about sport. I worked out very quickly that I wasn't sporty and I wasn't very good at sports. I was competitive about grades. Like, I would be
Right.
that annoying person at school that would like turn it to the teacher and be like, I know you gave me an A star, but why is it not full marks? I was annoying. Like, awful. Um, I don't know where that came from. By this time, my mum was a teaching assistant, and I think she always pushed me to do well at school. Um, but I had this like internal drive to do well. I even remember like key stage two sat, so like the exams you do when you're like 10 or 11. I cried because I got a 4 instead of a 5, and I like refused to go to school because I was so embarrassed. Like, I don't know where that came from, but I was so driven. Um, so yeah, but I just felt like I did better at, English and history. I quite liked writing, um, and yeah, maths and physics and stuff didn't bother me. I did biology at A level, but I liked that because it was like human.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
it was relatable. I was never that into space or anything like that.
Fair enough. And apart from George, was there anybody else at
Yes.
the school, like a teacher or guidance counselor or anything like this, that was
Hmm.
sort of giving you a push, or were they just like, listen, Emma, you've got the best grades in the school, go do whatever you feel like?
um, there was one history teacher. Her name was Miss Cooney, and she was very cool. And our A level history was really like politics because we did sort of 1900 to 2005. So it was more current affairs than, I guess, like classic history for most of it.
History. Yeah.
Yeah. And she really encouraged us to debate. And she sort of was one of those teachers that just you were so inspired by, and she was so passionate about the subject. So I think she was sort of the one that stood out. And when I said to her, I'm going to go and do law, she was like, you'll be great, you'll be a fantastic lawyer. So I think that's the one that stands out. But yeah, I just had this internal drive, and I don't know whether it was um, like I saw a lot of people around me sort of struggle with money, and I think I was like determined. I was like, I that's not going to be me. I'm going to make a success of myself some way, and then just sort of fell into doing a law degree, as I say.
Brilliant. And so that
Yeah.
law degree, you ended up in Durham,
Yes.
um,
After a
getting
very
a.
bad Oxbridge interview, I should say.
Oh no, what happened?
It was so bad. I was so stressed about it. Again, coming back to the determined thing, I was like, of course, Oxbridge is the place for me.
Yeah.
Um, and I wound myself up so much the day before, um, because this girl had said to me, "Oh, you're from the north, how cute," because obviously I had a really northern accent. Um, and I was like, I don't belong here. And I was like calling my mum at 3 a.m. the night before, like, I can't do this. She was like, just go and do it. Like, you'll be fine. And the interview was just so bad. Like, I had no idea what they were talking about. They were asking me like land law questions, and I had no idea what was happening. And
So I'm
I
making this
remember
face
walking
because
out
I
and just
obviously
saying,
I
yeah,
didn't go to Oxbridge. So
probably.
if somebody had asked me that as an
That's
interview, I think
Yeah.
I would
It was
have
just I just came out and
failed.
I was like, oh, no idea what they were talking about in that interview. Um, I had like I think some people like have quite good sort of commercial awareness and stuff even at that point, and I had none. I did law because I was really driven at school, and George did law. So yeah, that going into that interview, I had no idea what was happening. But I got into Durham, and on reflection, Oxbridge would not have been a good place for me.
Okay.
Uh,
Sounds like what was Oxbridge's loss was Durham's gain. So what did you how did you find university? Was it a thing that you were um, was it what you expected? Did you know go in thinking, oh, I'm going to be um, legally blonde, and then you start studying and think, my goodness, this is completely different from what I was expecting.
Yeah, the culture side was overwhelming. I'd never seen people like this. You know, you were people from Eton, and they just seemed to have no end of money, and would talk about all their fancy properties abroad. And I was like, oh my gosh, what is this place? But academically, in the first year, I did really well. But in second year, you know, all those years of being like, I want to be the best sort of caught up with me a bit, I think. And I was like overwhelmed. I moved home for a bit because mentally I was just really struggling to um, keep up with the demands of the degree. I'd actually say that was probably the hardest point of my legal career. I found that much harder than being at Linklaters. Because you know you could just study no end, and yeah, I found that side of university challenging, um, but I still think law is a great opportunity for those people like me that did come from a background where you didn't see, you know, loads of successful people, and it is a really great opportunity to go and world is your oyster, do something brilliant, and I sort of still saw that, I think, through the hours of studying.
And just out of interest, I mean, I hope this has changed and developed in the sort of intervening period of time. But when you were at university and you know having these challenges, did did the university have a support network there to help you through these things, or was it very much I'm on my own and I'm going to work through this and figure it out?
I felt like I was on my own. I think mental health at universities, and certainly awareness of that, is much better now than it was. Um, but my parents sort of stepped in when they realised things weren't quite right.
Yeah,
And I moved home for a bit and basically like travelled to Durham to do exams. Sort of just needed that reality check, I think, of being like, you know, these exams and this world isn't what I would consider real life at that time.
yeah,
Um, and yeah, I do think things have got better in terms of awareness. But back then, you didn't really, you know, people were just like, oh, it's just exams, you'll get through and it'll be fine.
yeah.
There wasn't really an awareness of uh, the sort of exam stress and how to deal with that and when things have gone too far.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I have to admit, I think one of the things that in my experience has been massively helpful is, like you say, just getting out of the bubble sometimes. Whether that's the university bubble, whether it's being a trainee and
Yeah,
working till 3 in the morning or something like this, and that becoming normal or what have you.
yeah.
But having the ability just to have a recheck can
Yeah.
make such a
For me
difference.
personally, I think that one experience in the second year of uni has defined and made it so much easier for me in the later parts of my career to know when things aren't quite right.
Mm,
Um, you know, I have been much firmer about work life balance and not pushing myself like I was doing until that point after then. So, as much as it was really hard at the time, I think it taught me very early where my limit is. And
yeah.
I still do work very hard and I'm very ambitious, but to a point.
I hope that you're enjoying this episode of the WTL podcast. As mentioned at the start, this series was inspired by a conversation with a group of law students involved in pro bono law clinics. These clinics provide a safety net and help address some issues in relation to access to justice in the UK. By educating people on the law, giving a voice to those who would otherwise go unheard, and righting the wrongs that otherwise would go unchallenged. The students were attending an event put on by probonoskills.com, who provide students involved in pro bono clinics with access to high quality training materials and events. Probonoskills.com exists to support students so that they can do more, help more, and achieve more for the UK's communities. If you'd like to know more, Whether you're a student involved in a law clinic or a qualified lawyer who may wish to help out with training sessions, please do visit their website, probonoskills.com, and reach out to the team. Going forward just a little bit, I mean, it seems that it did work out, and then you got your first from Durham. Did you then go straight? I did my degree in Scotland, so things were always slightly different. Like our degrees, 4 years rather than 3, and then you have a diploma rather than the LPC, if that's still what it's called.
Yeah.
So were you in the end of between second and third year when you started applying for traineeships and all of these things, or did you finish your degree and then do that kind of further education piece?
Yeah, so we applied in our second year and did vacation schemes at the end of your second year if you were lucky enough to get them. I had good grades from year one. That would be one of my top tips, by the way. That your first year grades are quite important when you're applying for law firms. Not defining by any stretch of the imagination, but even though they don't count towards your degree grade, the law firms only have those to go on. So although I had zero commercial awareness, and I mean zero, I had no idea about corporates in the commercial world, I had good grades. So I went and did vacation schemes at Slaughter and May, Kirkland and Ellis, and Linklaters back to back at the end of second year, which, looking back again, you can see a pattern, can't you? Again, slightly bizarre decision. But yeah, so did those, didn't get Slaughter and May, didn't get Kirkland and Ellis, but got Linklaters and was very happy about that. I thought that was the best fit, certainly, of the three. Had a great time with vacation scheme. So I went into third year knowing, provided I got a 2-1, I was in, you know?
Yeah.
So I actually calmed down and really enjoyed third year. I probably came out with the first because finally I was just enjoying it and doing it because I liked learning and studying rather than, putting myself under immense stress. So then I took a break for 6 months and earned some money to move to London. So I worked in a call centre. I worked as a retail assistant at Apple, and I worked as a HR assistant to get some spending money to move to London with. And then moved to London and did my LPC with my intake, and then joined Linklaters 6 months later.
All right, so was your LPC only 6 months?
Yeah, we did a fast track one. They threw a master's in there as well.
Oh, just
why not?
Just in case you weren't busy enough.
I know, kids were bored.
Exactly.
But it was a really fun 6 months actually, because I'd moved to London for the first time. It felt like that was the moment where I was like, oh my gosh, all these people were going to be lawyers, like we've done it, we've made it. And I partied a lot as much as I worked, I should say.
Excellent. It is important to have balance, right? And with that cohort, so you're it sounds like quite an intense 6 months. Is it just Linklaters people, or is it Linklaters, Slaughters and May, and all of that kind of banding of graduates or to be
unique,
solicitors?
And I don't know whether they still do it like this, but at the University of Law we were at, you just did it with Linklaters intake.
Right.
But I think those that went to BPP, they mixed more. Like you'd have a class with, I don't know, A&O and Norton Rose and that kind of thing. So it was just the intake we were going to be working with. So there was maybe like 50 of us. Well, it's quite weird because you obviously get to know people in a setting that feels more like university, and then you're thrown into the world of work with them, which is kind of strange.
Out of that group of 50, I imagine, doing the LPC, then doing 2 years training at Linklaters, is a little bit like we're in the trenches, getting sort of through this. So
I lived
of
with
that
them
group
as well. Yeah, so I lived with 3 other people from the intake, because obviously we met in the LPC and we're like, oh, we'll go live together. That makes sense. And my boyfriend of the time also happened to be in that intake. So my whole life when I was at Linklaters was Linklaters.
Right.
I think it's fair to say. So yeah, I'm not sure I'd recommend that to other people. It was a bold choice, but actually it helps in some ways because you get thrown into this world of Linklaters with a bunch of other people that are sort of working out at the same time, and you can have lunch with your friends, and it doesn't all feel like you're just working away all the time. Like, you have this great group of 50 people that you can then go for drinks with on a Friday and are sharing the same experiences with you. So I do think
And
that's good.
have you managed to keep up with some of those of the group of 50?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I still speak almost every day to my best friend Dorothy, who we lived together at the time, and she's now a writer. She's got nothing to do with law anymore. So yeah, definitely. I think it bonds you in a way that you can't compare quite to anything else to spend that much time with people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And from the sort of research and LinkedIn stalking, you did your 2 year traineeship.
Mhm.
Did you do a kind of NQ slot in Linklaters, or did you go straight on
No.
secondment at that point to Barclays?
Yeah. So in my full seat of my training contract, you could choose to go international to a client or to do another seat at Linklaters. And my mum wasn't very well at the time, so I was like, I don't want to be international just in case. I'll stay around in London. Did a client secondment and went to Barclays. Shock as to what happens next. I get about 3 weeks in and go, oh, being in house is really good. I love being in house. Not just because sometimes we get to go to the pub at 6, but I loved having the interaction with the business more. I found the kind of law really interesting. I loved that sort of thing where you pick up the phone to the client and you have to give a yes no answer in 30 seconds. That was exciting. So yeah, loved it, and basically said, please, can I have a job? And thankfully they said yes. But Linklaters didn't take that too
Right.
well. But yeah, so essentially just never went back.
Right. Okay. And from that first experience, was that your first experience in house?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And for some of our listeners, will understand the difference between private practice and in-house and things like this. But for any that don't, from your perspective, how would you describe the difference between, particularly as a junior lawyer, being with a law firm versus working in-house at a company?
So I think the first thing is probably responsibility. And that word is thrown out a lot at law firms, but in house, very often you will be the one person advising on something. It isn't to say that you can not go and ask questions to other people when you're unsure, but you're the contact with the client. You're the ones that's sending the emails. No one's checking your work unless you ask them to. You are front facing, and I loved that. I'm someone that really likes building relationships with people, and it just felt literally from day one like go and build those relationships now. I loved that side of it, and I loved that I would be the one sort of advising on the legal stuff on my own, and I had my own work and my own contacts. um Two, I think it is undeniable that work-life balance is slightly better, at least in most in-house positions. um I think the chances of you working till past midnight with no notice in house are much slimmer. So I had much more control over my life again. And, just those little things, like I trained for a half marathon, and um, I felt like it suited me much more I was healthier. Um,
Yeah.
so that was something that was important. Like my life outside work became easier. Um, and the final thing probably is that sense of team, certainly within Barclays. I feel like I felt it in a different way. We had, we sit an open bank set of desks with the same five people, and you learn together, you share your experiences of the client together, you learn about the business together. So there was just a really good team culture, and you were asking people all sorts of different stuff because in house you tend to advise on a wider area of things. You might get in something about contracts one day and something about competition the next day. So you're sort of learning together all the time, and I really liked that.
And of that sort of group of five that were in the bank
Mm-hmm.
with you, were they all lawyers, or were they some lawyers, some business people?
So the group of five that I called my team then were all lawyers. So we did predominantly corporate transactions for the investment bank, although we got involved in different things. I think it's fair to say that Barclays Bank has a very big in-house team, whereas some of the roles that we go on to talk about later, obviously now I'm sole legal counsel.
Yeah.
Condé Nast had a team of maybe 12 plus. So a lot of in-house teams are smaller, but this one was big. So you had a team of five, and then you were part of like a massive in-house legal function as well.
And I suppose it's a good time to skip on. So,
Yeah.
um, you graduated. You're in your early 20s. You've gone into Barclays, where you still have almost like a law firm within a client.
Yeah.
Um, then Condé Nast with a smaller firm, smaller
Mhm.
group of lawyers, but still a decent size if it's 12 for one client.
Yeah.
You've got a number of, as a junior lawyer, I imagine you have a number of senior people that you could learn from, bounce ideas from. But you then take up a role at Mina,
Mhm.
where you were the sole in-house lawyer. Is
Yeah.
that right?
Yeah.
How old, if you don't mind me asking?
27 or 28.
Okay, so still in your 20s, you've been a qualified
Yeah.
lawyer for about 3, 4 years,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden, it is your own show. Emma is the
Yeah.
lawyer for the entirety. Any question, whether it's a legal question or just a difficult question, is now going to be Emma, and she is responsible for it all. How on earth do you prepare yourself for that? And how did you find that transition?
I don't think you can prepare yourself for how that feels. So this is when I just moved to Sheffield, and was literally found it on LinkedIn through a search of legal jobs in Sheffield. And in terms of preparing myself, I don't think I did. I bought all the LPC textbooks again. That was a great tip that I learned
Okay.
from someone else. So if you need a starting point on anything, business, employment, all sorts of different things, dispute resolution, like have those there, because even though it'll probably only have a page on it, it will explain it in a simple way, and then that's your starting point. So I thought that was a very good tip. Um, but I think I was very lucky at Mina. We were a team of about 30 people, um, all very excited about the mission as a startup and where we were going. And I felt very much respected and listened to on day one. So if I said, "Oh, we need to review this thing. This should be a priority," no questions asked, it would be a priority. And I don't think that's the case in every in-house role. So I think I was very lucky that I didn't have to sort of, battle for budget too much or anything like that. Like people did really listen to each other. Um, so yeah, but I think you've just got to trust your training and trust your gut instinct and trust that, I had fortunately like 4 years of in-house experience at this point to go off, and I could use that. I also called in plenty of favors with law firms over that time. I said, can I just borrow you for 15 minutes on this, or can I just borrow you for 15 minutes on this? And people are very understanding and definitely want to help, generally speaking. Um, so yeah, you just gotta dive in. and trust that it'll be okay, and do your best and put your hand up for things where you're not sure. Again, one of the biggest things I learned in house is don't be afraid to ask questions if you don't know the answer, because in 5 days' time you're going to be really wishing you answered that
Yeah.
question. If you don't know what something is, just literally, I'm really sorry, I don't know that area of law. We need to go get some advice, or I don't know what you mean by that business term. I've never heard of that before. And again, people generally want to help you figure that out.
Yeah. And so in my previous career, I was in oil and gas, which basically speak in 3-letter acronyms at all points.
Yeah.
So when you first come in, it's just that I have no idea what's going on. But one of the things that I do think any in-house lawyer can actually bring is just asking the clarifications and what some people might think are the simple questions. Because quite often it will challenge an assumption or something in the business that's just taken as a given. And quite often when people
100%.
actually go through it, you go, oh, no, this is, why are we doing it this way? Or actually that assumption's wrong, or what have you. And without the person being slightly removed from the business asking the question, and without the in-house lawyer having the confidence. And I think this is one thing that lawyers are really quite bad for, is they don't ever want to be the person that says, I don't know. They always feel like they have to be perfect. But there is a real value in asking a question.
Exactly. The best lawyers I've come across are exactly that. They're humble. They want to learn. They know what they're really good at, and then they know, I need to call in some help here. This doesn't feel right. And a lot of law is still, I say law, I think so much of an in-house job isn't advising on the law per se. It is, you get a feel for what feels like risky things, or you'll go, oh, I've seen this in this business, we could do this way. And I think some of that just comes with time and experience. And it is really different being in-house to being in private practice for that stuff. You're a part of the business and the way it's run. So I think a lot of the time it's using your legal skills and not necessarily your legal knowledge.
Yeah. And actually just picking back up on one of the things you said right at the start about the going to Oxbridge, going for an interview and going, I've got no commercial, but I don't know what these guys are talking about. Or going into your Linklaters interview and going, right, well, I've got my grades. Look at my first year grades. In your career to date, has that kind of commercial experience just happened almost by osmosis? Or was it something that you identified and said, no, I need to go and do X, Y, or Z to increase this?
Both, I think. So I do think it's an issue we have in law in general from a social mobility perspective. Before the age of 18, I didn't know anyone who worked in finance that was interested in finance, that knew anything about companies. It just wasn't a language that was spoken about. So it felt a bit alien for someone to then go, well, go and read the FT. Like, I still wouldn't really enjoy reading that now. So start on the basics. I started reading BBC Business News and would ask those questions to people around me at Linklaters in corporate in particular. I would say, oh, why is that important to us, and those things. And I think you do just develop that stuff over time. But you've got to have the desire to learn it. If you've got no desire at all to learn it, it's going to be a long career.
Yeah, absolutely. Or a very short one, depending on how it goes.
Well, yeah, exactly. I think people talk about commercial law like that's the only thing you can do sometimes, and like there is a million things you can go and do with a law degree that's non-law, but also other parts of law. The most successful family lawyers, the most successful criminal lawyers. We don't talk about those careers enough either. And if commercial is something that just does not interest you, then go find something else that you're passionate about.
Absolutely. Okay, so I'm also conscious of the time. So one of the areas that I really did want to to cover briefly was, obviously we've talked so much about law, particularly given the topic of the podcast and whatnot. But in preparing for this, a couple of things that I thought really jumped out at me were non-legal related. So the first of these was the volunteer work that you do with MHFA and Social Mobility Foundation. So I was wondering if you could, or I was hoping at least, that you could give a really brief description of what it is that you're getting involved in, and also if there's anything that, if you're either a student going through law school at the moment, or potentially those younger lawyers that are reaching, I think, that point in the career that everybody does reach, where they start to question, okay, have I got the balance right? Is there something that I perhaps, do I just want to work for the big bad oil and gas companies or banks or things like this, or can I go and do something that's good for the wider society and things like this? And I think from what I understand from our conversations before, it's something that you've managed to incorporate into your daily life and in a really fantastic way, and I think it would be great to hear more.
Yeah. So doing good in the world, as I call it, is something that has been on my mind sort of throughout my career, particularly as I get that little bit more senior and I have a bit more probably power to say this isn't right, or we should be doing something about this in the legal sector. So I often take to LinkedIn to have a rant about things that I don't like, including some of the SQE practices recently, but that's a conversation for another time. So yeah, the reason that I wanted to work for the company I do at the moment, One Bright, is that we provide mental health services to people in the UK, which is something that is very important at the moment, not just based on my experiences as I spoke about earlier, but you see it with friends and family all the time. And I did the mental health first aiders course when I was at Condé Nast, and it's something that I was so interested about. So that's where that sort of drive came. Finding an in-house position that also was part of a business with a real purpose was important to me. And I still definitely make time for mentoring students that are perhaps from underrepresented backgrounds, whether that's through Social Mobility Foundation or whether it's just through answering LinkedIn questions from people who go, I don't know where to start on commercial awareness. I've got a call next week with someone that's really struggling with confidence in her in-house role and how to deal with that. So I definitely try and make time, probably an hour a week, to talk to people that want to further themselves in the legal profession. It's something just personally I absolutely love. The same with the O-shaped community that you spoke about at the beginning, and just pushing for a better legal profession, which is a bit more human. I started mentoring with the Social Mobility Foundation probably when I was a trainee. And I just went looking for those opportunities because it felt like something was missing. And I sort of sit here now looking at the person I was 18 going to that Oxbridge interview and go, oh, I wish I could have helped her and just given her someone in this world to go, don't worry, that's not going to be the end of your career. So yeah, I think I try and incorporate the giving back bit into my job now. And hot off the press, I will be doing some form of legal work experience this year. So keep an eye on my LinkedIn for that. But yes, absolutely. Encouraging work experience, certainly for those that won't necessarily get it in a conventional way, and making sure that those, particularly persons from a social mobility background, get mentors to sort of bring them into this bizarre world of law. It is something that's really important to me.
Brilliant. And what I will say is, once that stuff is ready to go, we will absolutely include links and stuff like this in any of the publications. So hopefully we can get the word out, although you already have a much better and bigger audience on LinkedIn. And then I think just to round things off, you touched on a few things that I think you're already addressing in what I would call your hit list of things you'd love to improve in the industry. Is there anything else on that hit list at the moment that's maybe at the start of trying to work out how we're going to make things better?
Yeah, the thing I always come back to is mental health in the junior parts of the legal profession, and actually increasingly in universities. So I've spoken about my experience, and since speaking about my experience at university, I've had so many people come to me and go, "Oh, I thought it was just me that was struggling with my law degree. I didn't want to tell anyone because I thought that would make me look like I couldn't do it or something like that." And it's just, it makes me so sad that we haven't cracked that yet. As I said at the beginning, I think the awareness is better, but I would love to see more universities giving more mental health support to students, and then literally all the way through law firm careers. There should be not just mental health support when things have gone wrong, but checking before it even gets there. How are you doing at the minute? Have you got too much work? How is your work-life balance? And there's been much more awareness and speaking about this in the legal profession over the last few months, I'd say. So we're getting there, but yeah,
It's the start of the journey rather than...
Yeah, exactly. And it does attract insecure overachievers, as is very clear from my story. As a personality type, I have decision paralysis about everything from what car shall I get to, buying a house. And working out how we do this job well, how we manage this profession in a way that really supports people's well-being is something very important to me.
And I think that is a brilliant place to end today's conversation. So I just honestly like to say thank you so much for taking the time. This is going to be part of a series on the WTL podcast, so we will collate everything up. And if you are listening and you'd like to know more, we will have the links below that Emma was referencing, and hopefully we will have a number of episodes coming soon. So please do, if you found this helpful or interesting, please do subscribe. And if you are affected or interested in any of the topics, please do not hesitate to reach out, and we will try to, as Emma says, help the profession do better.